Welcome to In the Lobby with Jared Baldwin. This podcast exists to give biblically faithful answers to your real life questions. But before we get into it, take a breath, find a comfy spot, and settle in. Thank you for joining me in the lobby. Hey, before we get into the episode, I want to let you know that after hundreds of hours of work, my brand new book, Walk Through the Shadows, is officially out now. Make sure to go grab yourself a copy, and I got a lot more to say, but I'll save it for the end of the video. I'm looking forward to this episode. I really am, because I've never actually heard like a preacher or a pastor talk about this before, but I've had people ask me this question, people that are kind of my age, where you get to this point and then it's like, I just don't like feel God's presence anymore like I used to. And you might be watching like, Jared, what the world are you talking about? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Well, I want to paint this picture, maybe tell the story of somebody who might be asking this question for themselves. It's probably someone who grew up in a Christian home. And not only did you go to church, but you also went to camp and you went to these concerts or these worship concerts or these big stages of whatever, right? And you would go to these places and there would be some kind of a feeling, like something in the air that just, it feels so sweet and so precious and so calming. And then the person on the stage, the pastor, the worship leader, or the preacher, the host, or whoever would come out and be like, do y'all just feel God's presence in the house tonight? Just something like that, right? And that kind of raspy voice of like, I don't mean to mock them, because it's really a beautiful thing. I don't mean to mock them, but it's really a nice thing when you get that really good feeling and then they stand on stage and they're like, oh my word, God's presence is with us. As if it's like magical or something, right? And we reflect on that. And I think if you experience that when you're younger, or maybe just younger in the faith, so it doesn't matter what age, but how long you've been walking with the Lord, you internalize that a little bit. And you associate that feeling, and emotions play a role, but it's not just emotions, right? Emotions play a little bit of a role. It's an emotional high, especially at camps and whatever. And you associate that feeling with God's presence. But then what happens down the road as you're growing in your faith, continuing on your walk with God? What happens when you don't feel that feeling of God's presence for a few days, for a few weeks, or months, or years? Like, what happens when you go a long, long time and it's just kind of like, God, I don't feel you at all around me? I don't know if you've ever had that feeling before. I know that I have, and I've talked to some people who have, and this episode may not be for everybody, but I believe it's for somebody who's just been struggling, where they're like, I just don't feel God's presence like I used to, and it feels like something is wrong. Like, it's discouraging, it's disheartening. It's like, God, where are you? I don't feel that feeling anymore. So today I want to talk about 3 reasons to help explain that. 3 reasons why you might not feel God's presence. And if you don't feel God's presence, I believe everyone will fall into one of these 3 categories or 3 reasons. And I want to do that by using a story that I was reading in John chapter 20. And I think it fits so beautifully. I think that there's some beautiful things that illustrate this in here. So let me go ahead and pick it up in the text. In John chapter 20, I'm going to be starting in verse 19. For a little bit of context, Jesus has just risen from the dead. All right, so we're at the end of the Gospel of Luke. We're kind of wrapping things up here. And Jesus is appearing to his disciples after resurrecting from the dead. It's a crazy thing, right? They've been suffering for the past few days. They've been anxious out of their minds, right? But Jesus is showing up. All right, verse 19. It says, on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them. I like how it doesn't explain how. It's just like the doors were locked. They were all huddled in a corner. And then Jesus shows up, right? It's like, what the world? Okay, but he's here. And he comes in and he says, peace be with you. After he said this, he showed him his hands and his side. Why? Because think of what just happened a few days ago. Jesus was on the cross and he had nails in his hand, and to make sure that he was dead, the Romans pierced him in his side. So he showed them, and it says the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." Here's where the fun part comes in. I like this part. Now, Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus showed up, when Jesus came, when Jesus popped up out of nowhere. He wasn't there. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." Now imagine for a second how unbelievable this would be, right? We just watched Jesus, our teacher, our rabbi. He was crucified. What are you talking about? You just saw him, right? He just died. What do you mean, right? So they go to Thomas and they're like, "We saw Jesus," because they did. He showed up to the disciples, but Thomas wasn't there. And so let's look at Thomas's response here. But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Whoa, all right. I mean, honestly, we call him Doubting Thomas in the church, kind of a nickname that we gave him. But that's kind of real, right? Like his friends just told him, his fellow disciples just told him something literally unbelievable. Like we use that phrase, like, "That's unbelievable." Like it's not that unbelievable. They came back from being down 7 points in a basketball game, right? It's not unbelievable. But this right here, like Jesus raising from the dead, like that's unbelievable, right? And so the disciples come in, they're like, "Thomas, he's risen from the dead." And Thomas is just asking for some evidence. He's just asking to see what they saw, to feel what they felt, to experience what they experienced. And we call him Doubting Thomas, but I don't think he's that unreasonable, right? Because the disciples all just got this experience. Why can't I? So he says, "I won't believe unless I see it for myself." Which brings me to the first reason why you might not feel God's presence right now. And maybe that's because you're just not in the right place for it. All the disciples were together, and we have no idea where Thomas was. Maybe he was out buying groceries. Maybe he was doing something he was supposed to be doing, right? But for whatever reason, Thomas was not with the other disciples at the time when Jesus showed up. And maybe the reason you can't feel God's presence is because you're just not in the places where God is showing up. Like, I'm not bashing Thomas's character. I'm not reading this into Thomas. I'm reading this into today. Maybe you're like, I work on Sunday mornings, so I can't really make it to church, but, I can listen to a podcast on Tuesdays when I'm doing this, right? And so you're kind of skipping church. You have an opportunity to go on a missions trip. You're like, actually, I'm good. I'm kind of busy. I don't have the vacation time. Maybe it's like a camp that pops up and you're like, it would probably be a good experience, but I also don't really want to go use those showers at the campsite, right? Whatever reason, right? Maybe you're not feeling God's presence because you're not trying to go to the places where he will show up. Like, you can't say, "God, I don't see you," while closing your eyes and holding your hand over them, right? Like, you can't be like, "God, I can't see you," when you're not looking. You can't be like, "God, I don't feel you," when you're actively running away from him, going in the opposite of places. Maybe, and like I said, I'm not saying that Thomas did anything wrong here. I'm saying this could be an explanation for us today. Maybe the life you're living is one of sin. Maybe you have this repetitive sin that you keep falling into or keep choosing to do. Maybe you're just walking away from God and disobeying how he outlined for us to live. And so if you're walking in sin, you're kind of living how you want to live, and they're like, "God, I don't feel you." It's kind of like, well, I wonder why, right? Like, you're not exactly choosing to walk closer to him. You're not exactly choosing to walk in obedience, and you're like, "I can't feel his presence." It's like, well, that makes sense, right? Like, if you have something that you need to repent of, let's start there, right? If you're like, "I can't feel God's presence," well, let's start in the things that we know to do. And here's the beautiful thing. I'm not saying that you have to be perfect, because here's the thing. God shows up to people living in sin all the time. It's about making that choice to turn around. like the prodigal son. You don't have to put yourself together completely. You don't have to have everything figured out. But you know what I love is the prodigal son got up from the pig pen and he went back to his father's house. He was still unclean, covered in mud, like religiously unclean also, right? Morally an outcast. You don't really want anything to do with this guy after what he's done and how he's wasted this money. So he did not have anything together. He had no time to do anything right. He couldn't make retribution. But in the story of the prodigal son, the father runs as soon as he sees him in the distance. He didn't have to get close. He didn't have to pay the money back, but the father runs to him. So I'm not saying that you have to be perfect to feel God's presence or to be reunited with God. I'm saying that the direction that we're going matters. If we're walking away from God and you're like, I can't feel God's presence, it's like, well, you're not really trying to, right? I'm just saying the direction that we're going matters. We have to choose to say, God, I want more of you. I want to follow you. Wherever you're going to be, I want to be there. Okay, you promise that you'll meet me if I read your word and seek you out in prayer. Okay, then I'm going to do those things. It's going where God is. Maybe that's the reason that you don't feel his presence, because you're not in the right place. All right, let's keep reading this story because there's more. There's other reasons. Maybe you are, right? And it's still just like you don't get that feeling. You don't feel it anymore. And you're like, I want to feel it, but I don't. Well, let's take a look. Let's keep reading in the story. It says in verse 26, a week later, all right, a few days have passed. A week later, Jesus' disciples were in the house again, and this time Thomas was with them. All right, so the disciples are all together, and Thomas is also in the room. Let's keep reading. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them. I love how it doesn't give us deep. Did he phase through the wall? Did he come through the floor? I always think of him phasing through the wall. He could have just popped up from the floor or dropped in from the ceiling. How crazy would that be, right? Anyway, how did he enter the room? I don't know. It doesn't say. It just says that he came and stood among them. Jesus is there, all right? He's there. Let's keep reading. He says, peace be with you, because I'd be terrified. But he's like, that's okay. Peace. Then he said to Thomas, he singles him out a little bit. He knew what was going on, so he singles him out. He says, put your finger here. I imagine him reaching out his hands. He says, put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand. Put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. That's what Jesus tells Thomas. And I love this next verse. Verse 28. Thomas said to him, Jesus shows up just like Thomas asked, gives him the opportunity to do the thing that he said, that he's like, I'll believe if I can do this. Jesus is like, go ahead, right? And how does Thomas respond? He says, my Lord and my God. What a powerful declaration. What a beautiful moment here. Because Thomas just spent the last 7 days, I'll say it, doubting Thomas. All right, I get it now. I get it. But he just spent the last 7 days being like, okay, well, I won't believe unless I see this. And then after this moment, he says, my Lord and my God. Here's a second reason that you might not feel God's presence. Because sometimes he lets us go through these seasons. These seasons when we don't feel his presence, when we don't get an answer to prayer, when we don't see him moving. Because then once the season is over, once the time is right and Jesus shows up, it is way more powerful. Sometimes it's hard to quantify and fully explain spiritual things. But I felt this to be true in my own life, where there was a prolonged season where I couldn't feel God's presence, and I would literally take walks every night, like looking for God, all right? I'm like, if you're there, I'm trying to find you, right? But I still remember the moment that he met me. And it was like the most powerful experience and encounter I've ever had with God was after a season of him almost hiding his face from me. And so if you're in a season when you can't feel God's presence, maybe that's what it is, a season. And what's coming is a powerful revelation that can emit a powerful response from you. Maybe God is working in your heart right now so that when he shows up, you are ready to respond. And that work in your heart, you might not feel it, you might not see it, you might not be able to whatever. You don't have these good feelings, right? But he's doing something so that when he shows up, you are ready. Because Thomas didn't see him for 7 days and then says, "My Lord and my God." And that's exactly what Jesus is. We say that now. Like we say that, we hear on interviews, "I want to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ." But picture like Thomas saying this to his teacher that he's been walking with. He's saying like, "You are my Lord and my God." Like it's an affirmation of Jesus' divinity. We do not see those very frequently, right? We don't see this kind of faith. But because Jesus waited, we have such a powerful moment with Thomas. And so maybe if you don't feel God's presence right now, maybe it's for a season and he's waiting to reveal himself. I'll give one more note before I move on. I've also heard it said that sometimes God hides himself for a season because he's waiting for you to rediscover him in a new way. Maybe God is waiting for you to take a pursuit, to take an initiative, to be obedient to something that he's revealed to you. Maybe God is hiding himself right now because he's waiting for you to do something in obedience, whatever that is, whatever he's revealed to you. Not like a dangling a carrot above your head, like, you can't reach it, right? Or like the bully with the basketball, like, you can't reach it, you can't get it. No, maybe he showed you something and you're just waiting for that step of obedience, for that initiative, for that pursuit to come back. So maybe if you can't feel God's presence, it's for a season. But maybe reason number 3 that you might not be able to feel God's presence, maybe it's something deeper than that. Maybe it's not a season. Maybe it's an invitation. Let me read the last verse in our story. Verse 29, "Then Jesus told him," Thomas, "because you've seen me, you have believed. But blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. Maybe the reason that God feels so far away right now, maybe the reason that you can't feel God's presence, you're not getting those good feelings, maybe he's inviting you into something deeper. Jared, what are you talking about? Maybe he's trying to grow you, pull you into a faith that doesn't depend on these good feelings. You know what I mean? Like if our whole faith, if our confidence in God is based off of these camp highs and emotional experiences and this good feeling of God's presence, maybe he's just trying to draw you into something deeper, draw you into a faith that's not dependent on feelings, that's not dependent on situation, but it's something deeper where you say, "God, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter how I feel, I believe you. God, it doesn't matter how I feel, I trust you." Maybe he's trying to pull you into that kind of a faith that's not dependent on this good feeling of God's presence. So, 3 reasons why you might not be able to feel God's presence. Maybe you're just not in the right place or places for it. Maybe you're living in sin and we got to figure that out, right? But like I said, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to put yourself all together. You just got to make that choice to turn around. It's a heart posture thing. Like saying, "God, I've been sinning against you, but God, I want to change things." Okay, reason number 1. Reason number 2, maybe God's hiding himself for a season for a greater revelation that is yet to come. Or reason number 3, maybe it's an invitation to pull you closer so that you have a faith that's not dependent on feelings. A faith that's less flimsy, less shakeable. A faith where you're like, it doesn't matter what happens. I love my Jesus. I know my Abba. and my Abba knows me. And I'll say this, look, sometimes you might not be able to feel God's presence, but he always promises that we have it. He says, and surely I will be with you always to the very end of the age. Even if you can't feel his presence, he's still with you right now. Draw near to him, he'll draw near to you. He is still with you right now, even if you can't feel it. I've had those prayer walls where I'm like, God, I don't feel super spiritual right now. Sometimes just got to keep praying through it. Not super easy, not super fun, not super romantic, not super spiritual, but sometimes you just got to keep going. And man, that pursuit of God, sometimes you just get to a place where it's not in the concerts or the camps that you feel his presence, but it's just sitting all alone. And it's a different kind of feeling, but it's still just as beautiful and just as sweet. I bet right now that if you can't feel God's presence, he's waiting to give you something amazing. In the meantime, his question of you has not changed. He's just asking, will you follow me? Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got. I pray this episode has been a blessing to you. Peace. Hey, thank you for tuning into this episode of the podcast. I hope that it illuminated the Bible in a real, practical, and impactful way. If you want to hear more, just check out the other videos on this channel. And thanks again for joining me in the lobby. Hey, before you go, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my brand new book, Walk Through the Shadows. This book is going to revolutionize the way that you read Psalm 23 and completely change the way that you understand that declaration that the Lord is my shepherd. How does it do that? Well, there's a story woven into every chapter here about a father teaching his son how to be a shepherd. So not only do you get insight into those cultural dynamics, but as you read it, you start to understand what Jesus meant when he said, I am the good shepherd. More than anything else, this book is going to show just how much God cares for us and just how much he loves you. If any of that sounds good, you can pick up a copy for yourself on Amazon now.